The air in command operations was a stale cocktail of ozone, recycled oxygen, and the bitter scent of burnt coffee. It was the smell of a long war, fought from a metal cavern buried deep within the asteroid fortress of Aegis 7. Light from holographic displays cast shifting blue ghosts across the faces of 100 officers, their voices a low, tense murmur against the constant hum of life support and data processing servers. In this world of polished boots, crisp uniforms, and sharp, predatory ambition, Elera Vance was a smudge of gray, a quiet anomaly nobody ever truly saw. She sat at a secondary terminal, tucked away behind a cooling conduit that wept a steady trail of condensation. Her uniform was regulation but worn at the cuffs and collar, a shade paler than the others from 1,000 too many harsh wash cycles. Her task, as it was every day, was the unglamorous but essential work of reconciling battlefield logistics reports. She collated ammunition expenditures, fuel consumption logs, and casualty notifications into neat, sterile columns of data. She was a ghost in the machine, a function, not a person. Her only personal effect was a data slate, an older model with a casing of scuffed, dull plasteel. Its screen flickered almost imperceptibly at the corners, a sign of age and heavy use. To the officers who strode past her station, it was just another piece of antiquated junk, much like the quiet woman who operated it. Commander Thorne saw it all from the command dais, a raised platform that gave him an almost theatrical view of his domain. He was the station's top strategic mind, a man whose arrogance was matched only by his success record. His uniform was tailored, his jaw was perpetually set in a look of supreme confidence, and his voice cut through the operational hum like a scalpel. Flanking him, as always, were his two favored lieutenants, Kale and Rorik. They were younger, sharper-edged copies of Thorne, their ambition a hungry fire in their eyes. They moved with the easy entitlement of men who had never known failure and who believed competence was announced with a loud voice and a dismissive sneer. They were the apex predators of this steel ecosystem. Thorne watched the main tactical display, a swirling galaxy of friendly blue icons and menacing red ones. Their probing attacks are getting bolder, he announced, his voice carrying across the entire floor. Predictable. Desperate. Kale nodded, his eyes fixed on the board. They can't break the Epsilon line, sir. We reinforced it last week. Let them try, Rorik added with a smirk. Gives the gunnery crews something to do. Elera's fingers continued their silent dance across her keyboard. She saw the data, they didn't. The fuel consumption reports from the Epsilon line pickets were 5% higher than projected. The ammunition requests for plasma coils were non-standard. Small things. Tiny threads of information that, when woven together, told a different story. Not a desperate probe, but a targeted reconnaissance. They were testing for a specific weakness. She filed a report. She highlighted the anomalies. She sent it up the chain, where it would land in a data queue to be ignored. It was her job, to see, to record, to forward. It was not her job to be heard. Later that day, Kale strode past her station on his way to the mess. He paused, looking down at her antiquated data slate with open disdain. "Seriously, Vance," he said, his voice loud enough for several nearby officers to hear. "Does the quartermaster make you check that thing out from the museum every morning?" Rorik, following behind, chuckled. "Careful, Kale. That relic probably holds the schematics for the first horse-drawn laser cannon." A few stifled laughs rippled through the nearby consoles. Elera didn't look up. Her eyes remained on the columns of numbers. She slid a file from one folder to another with a practiced, economical movement of her thumb. "Are you here to requisition supplies, Lieutenant?" she asked, her voice quiet, flat, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was like a stone dropped into a deep well. The lack of a flustered reaction seemed to annoy Kale more than any retort could have. "No, I'm just wondering why the clerical staff is taking up space on the operations floor. Shouldn't you be in an archive somewhere, communing with the dust bunnies?" "This is my assigned station," she replied, still not looking at him. He scoffed. "Right. The important work of counting bolts and bullets. He gestured vaguely at her screen. You let us know if you spot a typo. That could be the thing that loses us the war. He and Rorik walked away, their laughter echoing back. The other officers quickly returned to their screens, but the moment lingered in the air, a small, ugly stain of public humiliation. Elera's gaze remained fixed on her slate. Let them laugh. They don't know what numbers can do. The mockery, once initiated, became a kind of background radiation. It wasn't constant, but it was always there, a low-level hum of disrespect. Kale and Rorik made a sport of it. They would loudly discuss complex tactical problems near her desk, peppering their conversation with phrases like, "This is probably too advanced for the logistics folks," and "We need real operators to understand this." They nicknamed her the Archivist. The name stuck. It was whispered in the mess hall, used in quiet jokes between shifts. The Archivist found a missing crate of rations, crisis averted. Thorne's looking for the latest intel brief. Better ask the Archivist. She's probably filed it under ancient history. One afternoon, a critical supply convoy was ambushed in the Seraph Nebula. It was a disaster. 3 freighters lost, along with a month's worth of medical supplies and replacement parts for the fleet's primary shield emitters. Thorne was furious, pacing the command dais like a caged lion. How did they know the route? He bellowed to the room at large. That was a Level 3 encrypted flight plan. Elera, from her small corner, had already cross-referenced the flight plan with stellar cartography updates from the last cycle. The route, while encrypted, passed through a sector with a recently documented gravitic anomaly. A perfect place for a cloaked fleet to lie in wait, undetected by long-range sensors. The cartography update had been flagged as low priority, filed away by an automated system. She had seen it that morning. Quietly, she stood and walked to the dais. She held out her data slate to the junior officer managing the tactical feed. "The convoy's route," she said, her voice barely a whisper. It intersected with a previously unlogged gravitic shadow. "It's in the latest cartography update. File 7 Gamma, 9-inch. The officer, startled, looked from her to Thorne and back again. Commander Thorne stopped pacing. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing on the gray, unassuming woman standing at the edge of his platform. He didn't even glance at the slate. "Who is this?" he demanded. Not of her, but of the room. "Clerk Vance, sir," Kale supplied, a smirk playing on his lips. "She handles inventory." Thorne's gaze was utterly dismissive. He looked at Elera, as if she were a piece of malfunctioning equipment. "Clerk," he said, the word dripping with condescension. "Go back to your station and count your paper clips. The adults are trying to manage a war. We don't have time for theories from the filing department. I didn't come here to win. I came to show them who I am." The words burned, cold and clear, in the back of her mind. She gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, took her slate, and walked back to her desk. She sat down, her back ramrod straight, and resumed her work. The humiliation was a physical weight in the room, thick and suffocating. She ignored it. She had a job to do. The final layer of insulation around her was stripped away by Operations Officer Bryn. Bryn was a woman who had clawed her way to a mid-level command position and now guarded her authority with the ferocity of a starving dog. She saw Thorne as the center of power and orbited him accordingly, enforcing his unspoken will. Bryn had noticed Elera's brief, failed attempt to provide intelligence. She saw it as an overreach, a clerk getting above her station. A few days later, Bryn was conducting a routine security audit. She stopped at Elera's terminal. "Vance," Bryn said, her tone clipped and official. "I'm reviewing network access permissions. I see you have Level 2 clearance for logistical databases." "Correct." "Yes, ma'am," Elera said. "And yet," Bryn continued, tapping a few commands into her own pad, "your duties are strictly clerical. Reconciliation, cross-referencing. You have no operational need for real-time fleet movement data or tactical overlays. It helps to have context for the supply requests," Elera stated simply. "It helps you to snoop," Bryn snapped back. "Commander Thorne's command floor is for operators, not for curious clerks. Your access is being downgraded to Level 1. Archives and inventory only." A red icon flashed on Elera's screen. Access denied. The live tactical map she always kept running in a small corner of her display dissolved into a gray, static-filled box. She had been blinded. It was a deliberate, petty act of sabotage, cutting her off from the flow of information that was the lifeblood of the station. Bryn gave a thin, satisfied smile. Stick to what you know, Vance. It's safer for everyone. Elera watched her walk away. She looked at the gray box on her screen. They hadn't just mocked her. They hadn't just dismissed her. They had put her in a cage. They think they can break me. They'll learn. The attack came without warning. It wasn't a probe or a raid. It was a decapitation strike, aimed at the heart of Aegis 7. The main display flashed from a calm blue to a screaming blood red. Alarms blared, a discordant symphony of crisis. Dozens of enemy signatures materialized out of subspace, bypassing the outer sensor nets entirely. They were closer than anyone thought possible. How did they get through? Rorik yelled, his voice cracking with disbelief. Ghost Fleet, a sensor technician screamed. They're using shimmer cloaks. They were hiding in the asteroid belt. Chaos erupted in the command center. Officers shouted conflicting reports. On the main board, the enemy fleet, a swarm of angry red icons, moved with terrifying speed and precision. They weren't hitting the station's defenses. They were flowing around them, targeting the docking bays, the fuel depots, the command spire itself. Thorn stood on his dais, his face a mask of stone, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. His strategy, his entire defensive posture, was built on repelling a frontal assault. This was something else. This was elegant, sophisticated, and utterly lethal. Deploy the 4th and 7th squadrons, he commanded, his voice tight. Create a pincer. Box them in. Sir, they're not taking the bait, the tactical officer called out. They're ignoring our fighters and burning straight for us. Friendly blue icons began to blink out, one by one. The red swarm tightened its grip. The station shuddered as the first torpedoes struck the outer hull, the impact a deep, resonant groan that traveled through the floor plates. Thorn's composure finally cracked. His plan was failing. His perfect record was being torn to shreds in real time. He looked around the room, his eyes wild, searching for someone to blame. Intel, he roared. Where was the warning? My entire strategy is based on the intelligence you feed me. It's useless. His furious gaze swept the room and landed on the logistical section, on the clerks cowering at their desks. In his rage, he lunged for the nearest console, Elera's console, and with a sweep of his arm, sent her monitor and personal slate crashing to the floor. We don't need inventory reports right now, he bellowed. We need warriors. The data slate skittered across the metal floor, coming to a rest near the command dais. The room was a cacophony of alarms and panicked shouts. The station rocked again, more violently this time. Lights flickered, and in the heart of that chaos, Elera Vance stood up. She moved with a calm that was utterly alien to the pandemonium around her. She ignored the panicked officers, the flashing red lights, the very shaking of the fortress itself. She walked forward and bent down, her movements fluid and deliberate. She picked up her old, scuffed data slate. She straightened up. Her face was a blank mask, but her eyes were like chips of ice. They held a stillness that was more terrifying than any rage. The mockery, the dismissals, the sabotage. They had pushed too far. They had broken the cage. She walked past Thorn, who was too stunned by her sudden movement to speak. She walked past Kale and Rorik, whose mouths hung open. She ascended the 2 steps to the command dais, a place she had never been permitted to stand. The tactical officer at the main console looked up at her, his face pale with fear and confusion. Mom, this is a restricted. She didn't speak. She held up her data slate. With her other hand, she unplugged the officer's console link and, with a firm, solid click, plugged her own slate directly into the command interface. The entire room fell silent. Even the alarms seemed to fade into the background. Every eye was on the quiet clerk, the archivist, who had just hijacked the central nervous system of Aegis 7. What in the hell do you think you're doing? Thorne finally managed to stammer, his voice a mixture of fury and shock. Security, get her out of here. Elera ignored him. Her fingers flew across the holographic interface of the main tactical board, a place her access level should have made it impossible for her to even touch. But her slate, her old, ridiculed slate, was not a simple clerical tool. It was a master key. A cascade of authentication windows appeared. She bypassed them without a moment's hesitation. Code strings, military-grade encryptions, command-level firewalls. They dissolved before her like mist. Her fingers moved, a blur across the holographic interface. The tactical map, a mess of failing defensive lines and encroaching enemy red, began to change. "Cancel pincer formation," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the absolute, unshakable weight of authority. It cut through the lingering panic like a diamond blade. The tactical officer, frozen, did nothing. Elera didn't wait. She overrode his console manually. The order was transmitted. The blue icons representing the 4th and 7th Squadrons stopped their useless maneuver. "Retasking," she stated. She drew a series of impossible vectors across the map, her fingers leaving trails of pale blue light. She wasn't creating a defensive wall. She was creating a channel, a funnel. She pulled 3 destroyer groups from reserve, not to meet the enemy head-on, but to flank them from the station's magnetic pole, using the fortress's own energy signature to mask their approach. She rerouted primary power from non-essential sectors, shunting it all to the forward shield projectors, overcharging them to triple their normal capacity. She activated the station's hidden assets, a string of dormant minefields in the outer debris field that weren't even on Thorne's tactical map. They blossomed to life, turning a supposedly safe enemy retreat path into a kill box. Her commands were a stream of laconic, precise instructions. "Delta Group, execute fading serpent maneuver on my mark. All capital ships, fire solution gamma. Target their lead cruiser's engine housing. Fire on my mark. Lockdown docking bays 7 through 12. Vent atmosphere on my mark." It was flawless. It was brutally efficient. It was a symphony of destruction, conducted by a silent woman in a worn uniform. On the main display, the tide turned with breathtaking speed. The confident red swarm faltered, suddenly caught in a web they had never seen being spun. Their precise formation broke. They were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. Across the room, Captain Eva Rostova, the station's top signals intelligence officer, watched the data streams pouring from Elera's console. Rostova was a pragmatist, a woman who believed only in patterns and data. And the pattern she was seeing was impossible. It was a strategy of legend, a theoretical model of perfect, predictive combat taught at the highest levels of the War College. It was famous for being brilliant, audacious, and humanly impossible to execute under live-fire conditions. "No," Rostova whispered to herself, her eyes wide. "It can't be." A young ensign next to her looked over, confused. "What is it, Captain?" "The Scythe Protocol," Rostova breathed, her voice filled with a reverence that bordered on fear. "They told us it was a myth, a combat doctrine so complex, only one person was ever certified to execute it. An operator from the Meridian Special Projects Unit. They called her the Ghost of Meridian." The whispers started then. Scythe Protocol, Meridian. The names rippled through the stunned silence of the command center, words of myth and legend that no one had ever expected to hear in the real world. The final enemy cruiser, caught in a pincer it never saw coming, exploded in a silent, brilliant flash of light on the main screen. The battle was over. The red icons were gone. Victory had been snatched from the jaws of absolute annihilation in less than 7 minutes. Elera's hands dropped from the console. She stood perfectly still, her back to the room, watching the now-clear tactical display. The heavy doors to the command center hissed open. General Maddox, the sector's supreme commander, strode in, his face grim. He had been monitoring the catastrophe from his flagship. He had seen the station's defenses collapse, and then he had seen the miracle. He ignored the salutes from the shell-shocked officers. He ignored the pale, trembling form of Commander Thorne. His eyes found the small, quiet woman standing alone at the main console. He walked straight to her. He did not speak. He simply stopped 2 feet away and executed a crisp, perfect salute. It was a gesture of profound respect from the highest-ranking officer in the sector to a supposed clerical worker. "Captain Vance," Maddox said, his voice deep and resonant, filling the dead silent room. "I was told you had taken an administrative post on this station. Glad to see the rumors of your retirement were exaggerated." The name hit the room like a physical blow. Vance. Not Clerk Vance. Captain Vance. Thorne's head snapped up. His face, already pale, turned the color of ash. Cale and Rorik looked at each other, sheer, unadulterated terror dawning in their eyes. "Sir," Thorne stammered, taking a half-step forward. I don't understand. This is a logistics clerk." Maddox turned his head slowly, his gaze so cold it could have frozen helium. "Officer," he said, "you are addressing the single most decorated intelligence operative of the Outer Rim campaign." He turned his aide. "Put her file on the main screen. Unseal it. Authorization Maddox Omega-1." The tactical map vanished, replaced by a personnel file. A picture of a younger Elera, her face hard and unsmiling, stared out at them. And beneath it, the stark, unbelievable text. Name, Vance Elera. Rank, Captain, Field Promotion, Classified. Unit, Meridian Special Operations, disbanded. Service Record, Classified. Specialization, Predictive Tactical Assault, Ghost Protocol Execution. Confirmed hits, 121. The number hung there in the air. 121. It wasn't a score in a game. In the lexicon of special operations, a hit was a confirmed enemy capital ship, a fortified command bunker, a high-value strategic target eliminated. To have 5 was to be a veteran. To have 10 was to be an ace. 121 was a number from a ghost story. Thorne stared at the number, his mouth opening and closing silently. His entire world, his entire sense of superiority and status, had just been vaporized. The woman he had mocked, dismissed, and humiliated was not just as superior in skill. She was a living legend. He had called a god of war a paper pusher. His legs gave out, and he staggered back, catching himself on a console, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Cale and Rorik looked as if they had seen a ghost. They pressed themselves back against the wall, trying to become invisible, their faces slick with a cold sweat. The men who had built their identities on arrogant mockery were now just 2 terrified boys in the presence of something they could not comprehend. Officer Bryn, standing near the entrance, simply closed her eyes, a look of utter professional and personal ruin on her face. The stunned silence of a room slowly transformed. It was not applause, not at first. It was a low murmur of awe. Phones and datapads that had been dark were suddenly raised, not to record a failure, but to capture a moment of history. The whispers of Scythe Protocol and the ghost of Meridian became a steady, reverent buzz. Private Jensen, the young tech who worked a few stations down from Elera, just stared, his eyes shining. He had always been quiet himself, and he had watched the daily humiliations with a sense of helpless anger. Now, he felt a surge of pure, unadulterated inspiration. Strength didn't have to be loud. General Maddox turned back to Elera. "The station is secure, Captain. Thanks to you." Elera gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Just doing my job, General." Maddox allowed himself a thin smile. "Commander Thorne," he said, turning his cold gaze back to the broken man. "You are relieved of command of this station. Report to my aide for reassignment. You'll be overseeing inventory at the supply depot on Tartarus. I hear they have a lot of paperwork there." It was a death sentence for a career like Thorne's. A public, humiliating demotion to the most remote, insignificant outpost in the sector. Cale and Rorik were next. They were stripped of their command track positions and reassigned to a deep space listening post, a 10-year tour of watching empty space. Bryn was demoted to a junior logistics clerk, the very job she had so despised Elera for holding, and tasked with manually cataloging shipping manifests for the rest of her career. The fall was absolute. The justice was poetic. In the days that followed, Aegis 7 was transformed. The story of the archivist, who was secretly the ghost, spread like wildfire. Elera Vance became a legend. Officers who had once looked past her now averted their eyes in deference or offered shy, respectful nods. General Maddox formally offered her command of the entire Aegis 7 battle group. It was a promotion that would have made her one of the most powerful commanders in the fleet. She refused. "I'm an analyst, General," she said quietly in his office, the scuffed data slate resting on the table between them. "Not a commander. My place is with the data." She requested only one thing: a transfer to the Alliance Intelligence Academy. She didn't want the glory or the power. She wanted to teach. She wanted to ensure that the next generation of analysts understood that the smallest details could win the biggest wars, and that a quiet mind could be the most dangerous weapon in the arsenal. Elera Vance left Aegis 7 as quietly as she had arrived. There was no ceremony, no parade. She just wasn't at her station one morning, but her legacy was cemented in the station's very soul. Her old, battered data slate was placed in a vacuum-sealed case and mounted on the wall of the command center, right below the main tactical screen. The plaque beneath it was simple: Captain Elera Vance, the ghost. Listen to the numbers. They do not lie. Her story became a training module at the academy, a required lesson for arrogant young officers who thought strategy was about loud voices and bold gestures. It was a permanent reminder that the most formidable power often resides in the quietest corners, and that you never, ever underestimate the person who handles the paperwork.